Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, November 9th, 2020. Broadcasting here live from Four Seasons Total Landscaping Studios. What a weekend. Well, I had a feeling it would be kind of crazy, but it was a nice one. Probably one of the more relaxing weekends we've all had for some time. Not that the danger is entirely over, but, well, we had a pretty good week and pretty good weekend here, and I think we did a fairly good job explaining that some waiting, some patience would probably pay off in big ways, and they kind of did. And I hope we got you through the crazy week last week and the weekend. Well, the news probably sustained you through the weekend this time around. A relatively quiet Donald Trump went golfing twice. That's interesting news. And, of course, was pointed out to me in an interesting statement over the weekend. Yeah, you know, somebody who really and truly believes that the fundamental freedoms of our democracy being under threat and the election being stolen right out from underneath him and condemning America to a horrific future under socialist pedophiles, I guess, too, as well under Joe Biden, probably doesn't take the weekend off and go golfing twice. But, you know, I guess that kind of fills us in on where he is mentally, I suppose. It was interesting to see him come in and out, and I did make it out to the golf course. You know, I'm not far from Trump National in Virginia, which has a big sign out front that says it's in Washington, D.C., and it isn't. And on Saturday, when the news finally broke that the networks were all calling the race for Joe Biden at last, the second news I got of it over Twitter was that he was already out on the golf course when that happened. And I said, yeah, maybe I'll go on over and see if anybody from the neighborhood is around, maybe hanging out outside the golf course, perhaps to give him a little bit of a message. There's been a diehard core of protesters that have been out there every time they hear he's departing for the golf course. If they happen to live nearby, they come out with their signs. And in later weeks and months, some pro-Trump forces showed up. So everybody was out yesterday, but I still think it was probably still running about, I don't know, even 80-20 perhaps in terms of people standing around. The cars driving back and forth in front of the entrance to the golf course and in between the two sides of the street where people were gathered on the sidewalk were, well, let's say, the balance of the vehicles was probably a little closer to 50-50, but I think still in terms of the numbers of cars, still probably pro-Biden, but the larger vehicles, the gas guzzlers, the big trucks, the trailers with the giant flags, etc., were out for Trump. Although somebody managed to rig up their Tesla with some sort of, I guess, like bike rack and had enormous flags flying off of that. But I guess they got tired or ran out of battery. I'm not sure which happened first. Driving back and forth. It's not a big area and it's not a big street. It's a little, quiet suburban neighborhood street. With the golf course is just sort of tucked up in there. The sort of thing that you might expect to find perhaps in a gated community somewhere, except there's no gate here. So anyway, well, there's a gate between us and another neighborhood that's even ritzier that doesn't want any of us driving through. There is that, but you wouldn't call this a gated community. Anyway, big day. So we were out there and had a good time and waved our what do we had one sign with us. Our younger son came with us straight from the Scouts meeting and brought a sign with him to wave, and we just basically went there to look and see what a ridiculous spectacle it was and yell at his motorcade when he finally left and take some video. And a couple people came out, of course, specifically to give him the finger. Julie Briskman was there. Julie Briskman, of course, became famous in that photograph of her bicycling alongside the road, and the motorcade went by, the Trump motorcade, and she just sort of spontaneously gave him the finger as he drove by, and the photo ran in the Washington Post and then around the country and around the world. Fired from her job, etc., etc. Ran for office for the local county government, representing the area wherein Trump National lies, and won, and is our county supervisor, and has been for some time. So that was fun. She was out there. She was out there on her bike for a while, but I think the vehicular traffic became too much, and posed a particular danger for riding back and forth on the bike. But she had a great time herself out there with a handheld, like a battery-operated mini bullhorn of sorts, and playing music through her phone and putting the bullhorn up to the speaker and playing Dancing in the Streets and Celebration and all that good stuff. So we all had a good time. And in the meantime, I guess we probably got back in time to find out that there was, the press conference had been held at the, this is the most absurd story, perhaps of the year, and a great cap to the whole Trump farce. I'm sure you've heard the news by now. We'll just make some brief mention of it and marvel at the fact that they even tried to explain how they came to have the press conference in Philadelphia, which was aimed, I guess, at continuing to contest the election and insist that it had been stolen from Trump and the forces of good. And the basic story, I guess, was something like they must have been driving down to Philadelphia from New York and or up from Washington. Giuliani's team, I guess, I don't know where he was at the time. Maybe he was in D.C. already, but driving into Philly, they must have just Googled up Four Seasons, thinking, why don't you? We need a place for a venue for our press conference. Call the Four Seasons, book the place, and go ahead. And I don't know, the guy must have Googled on his phone or whoever it was, and got Four Seasons, put in Four Seasons Philadelphia, and maybe the first hit was this landscaping place. There's really no other explanation for how it could have happened. Although the most hilarious thing about it, perhaps, was that they were trying to come up with an explanation and saying, well, it's a secure location. And, we need a secure location because no one of any national importance is going to be here. There's no Secret Service contingent or anything like that. There's Rudy Giuliani and a couple other weirdos. Wasn't even any ancillary members of the Trump family around. So a secure location, by the way, means a chain link fence with barbed wire on the top so that nobody breaks in and steals the lawnmowers from Four Seasons. Total landscaping. And, of course, the rest of the setting, that it was, this lonely industrial road. They also said it's got easy access from the highway, easy on, off. And it's got easy access to the highway because it's in an industrial area. Low rent crap is out there, and, that's what you put there. I don't know whether the Four Seasons Hotel ever got a call and asked, or whether they were booked or what. And I guess, they must have set up the press conference, asked the address or taken it off of their Googling and put it on the press release and blasted it out and told the press that it was going to be there. And then they got there. They must have been driving up saying, there should be a high-rise building around here somewhere, the Four Seasons, and there's not. And I'm thinking about, it must have been like something out of, Curb Your Enthusiasm, where other people pointed to Veep, that pulling up to the thing and seeing that sign that says Four Seasons, total landscaping. Just thinking, turning and like, I'm going to murder this idiot that made this, that reserved this place. Although a lot of people were speculating about what must that phone call have been like on the other side. You want to come in here and have a press conference with Rudy Giuliani? I wonder, did it ever occur to them? They must think, right, that this is the Four Seasons Hotel? But do you go, sure, you can have a press conference here. Did they ever discuss a price or anything? Would that have tipped them off? Well, how much to rent out I'm sure they said we'll do it outside in the parking lot because COVID. And I'm sure that this would have gone. This is a very specific set of circumstances. If they had said, can we use do you have like a ballroom we can rent? No. Oh, I see. What do you booked? You're very popular. Yeah, whatever. Well, how about we use your parking lot? Yeah, how about that? And then they did, and I guess it worked out for the best, I suppose. I don't know what to tell you, and there's probably no need to tell you anything. There's a bunch more news. Greg Dworkin is here. That's news in itself. There's vaccine news this morning that Pfizer Total Landscaping has come up with a brand new vaccine. Not brand new. They've worked on it for a long time. They think they're ready to roll it out. Don Trump Jr. I gave a little thought to poor Don Trump Jr. But he says, of course, the timing is suspect because the announcement came out right after the election, which, of course, Don Jr. will tell you they won. So I'm not sure what the suspect timing actually is. So, what's the difference whether it comes out before you totally win or after? But lots of good news in the future besides the fact that we'll eventually be rid of Donald Trump. Right, Greg?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's going to be fun when we don't have to pay attention to what those guys say. And you can start now if you wish.
It's fair.
But it's just, it's just one of those weird situations. I was watching the cold open on Saturday Night Live and thought, it was interesting. They have Jim Carrey playing Joe Biden. Not a great fit. But you could argue that the entire series of episodes was building up to this.
Yeah.
Because they had the Joe Biden speech that they were, spoofing. Mm-hmm. And they had a very sedate Joe Biden, played by Jim Carrey.
Yes.
Who said, it's you have to take your time and you have to be patient. And, in every election, there's winners and there's losers.
Yes. And finally, we understand why they used him.
That was just everything about this.
Yeah, he really redeemed the whole series of things. Like, finally, now I know why they hired him. Yeah,
but it was, it was great. Those 8 seconds were fantastic.
that was pretty good. It was an interesting day, interesting evening.
Go watch it. He does it very well.
They scrambled to match Kamala Harris's wardrobe very nicely as well for Maya Rudolph. The whole thing went pretty well.
And by the way, so did the election. So
yes.
Let's mention some things about that, and then maybe in the second part we'll do a little bit about what this vaccine news means.
Okay.
All right. We can do it the other way around, whatever you want to do. But that's the way I was thinking about it.
All right. I think that makes sense.
So we won the election, and it turns out, as Larry Sabato points out, it wasn't especially close. The same thing happened in 2018. President-elect Biden wins 306 electoral votes. He's got a 4 to 5 million vote plurality. And that is probably going to grow as California and New York come in because they're still counting. Yeah, and there's millions of votes out there still to count. There's 6 million votes out there.
Yeah.
And let's say Biden wins them 2-1 because they're mail-in. That means you could add another 2 million to the 4 to 5 million. Now you're getting into 6 to 7 million vote plurality with 306 electoral votes. And that doesn't look close at all. I mean, the problem is the counting was slow.
Yeah. Well, if
you have to count all at once, this isn't a close election.
Right. Yes, that was a major theme of last week. And then, as you point out, major theme of 2018. And did anybody write this election is 2018 articles anywhere?
They did, actually. There's a couple of, well, I don't know about articles, but I certainly saw on Twitter that, hey, you got to look at it this way. And that may be true, for example, with the Senate.
I mean, prior to the election.
About the Senate, but we've got 2 runoffs, and if we win them both, it's 50-50.
Yes.
Assuming Alaska comes in Republican, which we don't know yet, and assuming North Carolina comes in Republican, which is probably, but we don't know that yet.
Yeah.
So, it ain't over till it's over.
Sure.
And so a 50-50 Senate, is it possible? Could we win? We just won Georgia.
Yeah, that's the thing.
I mean, Kelly Loeffler's awful, and Purdue's awful, and so, it's possible.
Yeah, it's you approach it cautiously. Don't bet the whole house on it. But if you do liquidate all your assets, send them to Georgia so that we can pull this out. But ordinarily, the history of these things is, well, okay, you made it to a runoff, And then when all the spotlight is on just these two races, Georgia kind of comes home to Republican outcomes, except we just witnessed Georgia come home to a Democratic outcome at the top of the ticket. Now this will be the top of the ticket, and everyone will know what's at stake. Not, Georgia isn't filled with political junkies necessarily, but there's a real thing that can happen here.
Right. So other info that comes with this, Don Greenspan tweeting, Trump's won fewer electoral votes than nearly any incumbent president since 1900. Well, Reagan got 525, 523 for FDR and 36, 520 for Nixon. That was against McGovern. 457 for Eisenhower, 449 for FDR in 1940, 432 for FDR in 1944, 379 for Clinton, 332 for Obama, 306 for Biden.
Yeah.
292 for McKinley, 286 for Bush 2, 277 for Wilson, and then Trump got 232 twice, 168 for Bush 1, 49 for Carter, 59 for Hoover, 8 for Taft. So pretty good there, both in the popular vote and then the Electoral College. And when you're looking for an Electoral College win and then also realize that you pretty much smashed all records with the popular vote, that's pretty good. Now, here's how the vote is counting. Vote counting is going. Jamie Dupre posted this on Monday at 7:45 a.m., a couple hours ago. The vote count update compared to 48 hours ago at this time. Georgia was 7,248, now up to 10,353. Pennsylvania was 28.8, now it's 45,727.
Pretty good.
Nevada's 22.6, but now 34.2. And we got to talk about Nevada for a little bit. And then Arizona's dropped to 69 from 29.8, but that's a race that Trump can't win. He's got to hit 60% in the rest of the votes, and there aren't any votes. So Biden is going to win Arizona whenever they get around to doing the provisionals. Provisionals are hard because you have to do them by hand.
Yeah, and you fight about
it. And fight about it and have people yell at you and threaten your life while you go ahead and do that. And I wish that was an exaggeration, but it's not.
Right.
So it takes time. But Biden will win Arizona. He'll win Georgia. There'll be a recount, but a recount, will pick you up 200 votes one way or the other. Biden leads by 10,000. So Georgia is a state Biden won. Of course, those elections in Georgia for Senate are possible. It's not crazy. It's not looking at Alabama and say, the only way we get the majority is if Doug Jones wins. I love him, but, that's not likely. In Georgia, it's absolutely possible.
True. They just engineered a statewide Democratic win days ago. So
by more than people anticipated.
Yeah.
And, the interesting thing is if Trump's going around trying to claim the election's being stolen, who stole it for him? Who stole it for Joe Biden? Was it
here, so
Brian Kemp?
Me. Yeah, right. Thanks a lot.
Was it the Republican governor of Arizona?
No.
I'm missing the thread here.
Yeah, I don't know. Not to mention, as others pointed out, why didn't they steal the Senate along with it? If you're going to
why did the
balance.
Republican states?
Yeah.
Why
did they help?
Could say, I get what happened in Florida, and if you want to make a conspiracy theory and say, well, the Republican governor Ron DeSantis stole it for Trump, but how do you make that case in Georgia? Well, the Republican governor stole it for Trump. Oh, wait.
Right. Bribery? Did we bribe anyone?
Part.
Okay. Yeah, not likely to work out in any real. But because if you're crazy.
Part of it. Remember, Trump wants you to count the votes, except when he doesn't want you to count the votes. Okay, we got a 45,000 vote lead in Pennsylvania, and it looks like, remember, they went and took the trouble to go to the Supreme Court to say that any vote that arrived after November 3rd, even if it was postmarked beforehand because the post office was trying to screw us, you have to sequester those mail ballots and do them separately. Mm-hmm. None of the counts in Pennsylvania include them.
Right.
There were about 53,640 mail ballots returned in Pennsylvania after November 3rd.
Right.
50% were by registered Democrats and 31% by registered Republicans. So those mail ballots will help Biden build up more votes.
Yeah, if they go and count them.
Maybe another 10,000 votes there. okay? And the ballots returned before November 3rd were 65% Democrats and 24% Republicans. In other words, Democrats did their best to get those ballots in early.
Yes.
And the ones that were done at the last minute were still Democratic, but more likely to be Republican than the early ones.
Right. I think, a lot of Republicans sort of, changed their mind at the last second and said, I think I'm not going to go out into COVID and I will cast this.
So you look at this and say, well, what are Republicans saying about not counting those ballots?
What are they saying?
Those are more Republican friendly than the early ones, yet they would still add to a Biden lead.
Yes.
So what do you do with them?
I don't know.
Well, the Republicans say, well, the bottom line is how many ballots are for Trump, and if it's a net negative, then we don't want them. So we don't really care if we disenfranchise our own voters so long as we win, because screw them. It's about us.
Right. But what about if you lose?
But it couldn't be more clear.
Yeah.
This is a perfect case of I don't want your vote counted, even if you're a Republican Trump voter. Not if it doesn't help me. Screw you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to the Supreme Court, and I'm going to make that case. And I expect to win.
You're not going to. But, that is that's a tough position to be in if you care about things. But
that gives you an idea how they wound up on, Four Seasons landscaping next to Fantasy Island and across from the crematorium.
Yes.
It's the same kind of long-term planning, that led to that particular position.
Amazing. I would love to. I wanted to be in the car when they rode up. This is it. This is not it. This is it. This is it. Oh my God.
Is it.
And then just that and the decision. No, we just have to go ahead. There's no time to change to somewhere else. We're not going to get our audience, which probably would actually, in hindsight, they probably should have done that. Let's just disappear from here quickly. And the press will show up here and we'll be like, why did you go to a landscaping company, you dummies?
So speaking of elections, let's just finish up this segment with two observations. One of them is on polling. This is from the Washington Post, the monkey cage people, the political scientists.
I know
this
them.
is Chris Warshaw and Emily Thorson.
Oh.
And they say, on average, the polls appear to have been off by about 2.5 to 3 percentage points this year.
Yes.
Which, by the way, it's not that bad. That's a pretty reasonable polling miss.
Oh.
The absolute error in polls is not necessarily larger than previous years, but crucially, both public and private polls continue to overestimate Democratic votes in Florida and in the Midwestern states. And it's interesting because the misses were in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Florida. The rest of the map was actually pretty good.
So 4 states are chronically problematic, I guess.
Exactly. That's the point they're trying to make. Now, district polling was terribly off. That's a different, separate problem. But these inaccuracies, they point out, persisted despite many methodological improvements in state polls since 2016. Maybe it really doesn't matter whether you wait for education, including weighting by education, sampling based on the voter file, fielding more surveys closer to election day to guard against late shifts in the electorate. It would be premature to abandon survey research generally because the election polls are intended to predict vote share, but survey-based social science has goal of better understanding of the relationship, and in many cases, the evidence about the public's position on a particular issue corroborated by voting patterns. For example, not only do most Americans support raising minimum wage, majorities also consistently vote in favor of ballot initiatives designed to do this. That's what happened in Florida, even though we lost.
Yes, that's
right?
true.
So that part of the polling, the issues polling was good. The who's going to win polling was bad. But just, have those two concepts together in your mind and set it aside. And also wait for all the vote to come in, because the more vote comes in, the closer to the polling it actually looks. It's one of those mirage things where it looks like you were really off until the polls come in and say, maybe we weren't that far off. So, you have to put that in. For example, remember our theme, what if the polls don't tighten? They didn't. And then when you go look at the national results, that's correct.
Yeah.
7 million votes. That's not that close. They didn't tighten.
That's true. We do. Yeah. I almost forgot that we should check in on that. But right, true. No tightening there. And in fact, the more counting they do, the less tightening. In fact, it's untightening. I don't know. It's diverging, but Okay. So that vindicated
right?
too.
Then the other thing to talk about in terms of the election is just the way it was presented in the media, particularly on broadcast, on cable, and the networks, and the bizarre hoops that people needed to jump to not call this race. Remember, you have to set up the situation of what happened. AP and Fox use a different group of exit polling than everybody else.
AP and Fox. Okay.
Right? The other networks stick with the old Edison consortium, and I think AP and Fox have their own. And so AP and Fox were the ones that called Arizona, quote, early. Turns out it was a correct call.
Right. But it was early. That's still true.
Relative to the others.
Yes, right.
Okay? So AP and Fox call Arizona.
Yes.
It's clear that Trump is losing, but then Trump world loses it and starts yelling and screaming at AP and Fox, who have to defend their vote. And that means that because Biden was already at 253 by everything else, including the Midwest states, okay, Arizona's 11, that gives you 264. If you call Nevada, that makes it 270.
Yeah.
So nobody wanted to call Nevada.
Ah.
Even though Nevada was obviously one for Biden days before they actually called it. Days before.
Yes.
John Ralston, who's been following it, not just on his early voting blog and predictions, it's like, come on, guys, the only votes left are in Clark County. We know how Clark County votes. And as I read to you, the further the vote goes on, the bigger Biden's lead got up. Finally, they had the guts to do it, but only after they called Pennsylvania so they could get out of that box.
Yeah.
You didn't want one network having called Nevada, the other one called Arizona, and then what do you have to do, add the networks together?
I guess
it was a bizarre situation, but that's what happened. So they called Pennsylvania, got out of that box, and then immediately they called Nevada.
Not a bad solution. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday. But our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. We continue. Greg Dworkin is here. We certainly haven't covered it all, but I think all the basic stories. I mean, look, Joe Biden won, so that's the top line.
A couple other ones. One more at least I want to do.
Sure, please.
And that is the incredible outburst of dancing in the street and joy.
Literally, yes.
When the results were announced.
Yeah, that was fun.
I have a lot of friends and family still in New York City.
Okay.
And they were first just direct messaging me, and then finally you started to see it in the tweets of not only people yelling and singing and dancing in the street, literally.
Yes.
But it turned out the new heroes were the U.S. Postal Service.
Yeah, that
Every
was
time
really
a
something.
postal truck went by, they would just yell and scream, and the guys in the trucks would wave. And it's like, we did our job, finally. Maybe we can, get a little relief from all of this, because it was just incredible. And, of course, it was the Postal Service delivering the votes that won the election.
Yes. Which
is why they were being treated by heroes. So that was just a wonderful, wonderful thing to see.
It was very nice.
Plenty of examples of that. I have a couple in the pundit roundup just of the videos, but they were just absolutely outstanding.
Yeah, I mean, right. So for the actual frontline postal workers, despite it all, but they had to say, I know what our orders are, but that's just not why we're in these jobs. We're just, you're going to take our sorting machines, we're going to sort by hand. You're going to take our overtime, we'll volunteer. This mail's going out.
Yeah, I'll just deliver it on my own time.
Yeah.
We'll just do
It's
it.
pretty amazing. Still a
So
lot of
I
ballots
think,
out
here's
there,
a summary,
by the
just
way.
I think from Patrick Dillon on Twitter. Today's the day Joe
Okay.
Biden became president.
That's true.
He just had a statement on the Pfizer vaccine news last night by public
Oh.
health advisors who were informed of this excellent news. I congratulate the brilliant women and men, notice the order there,
Yes.
who helped produce the breakthrough and give us such cause for hope. At the same time, it's important to understand the end of the battle is still months away. That's why the head of the CDC warned this fall for the foreseeable future, mask remains a more potent weapon than the vaccine. America's still losing 1,000 people a day, points out, everything we pointed out here. We've got a long way to go. So mask up and do what you need to do, flatten the curve, knowing that the help is along the way. And Patrick Dillon, who posted that, added, look, I'm just saying I think we owe this new president a chance and need to understand he's not well versed in the ways of Washington. Now, he may do things differently, but with adults in the room and allowances for his unconventional style, we should expect the office will change him.
Yeah, right. He'll rise to it. It's time for him to pivot.
Now, does that sound stupid? It was pretty stupid the first time they said it 4 years ago, looking back and seeing what happened. So, let's bring somebody in who actually knows what they're doing. And, obviously this warms my heart. But if you listen to what Joe Biden has been saying about vaccine all along, it was, you got to be careful with distribution.
Yeah.
That's
can you imagine?
how you win this game. It's not just enough to have it. And by the way, what Pfizer announced today, just to be clear, was a press release.
All right.
It's not the same thing as providing data, but they're very encouraging that 90% effectiveness. One of the nice things that Donald Trump did for us is he provided us with enough virus in the community so that the placebo group got infected right away. So we found out earlier that the vaccine actually might not work. Or might work. So, he gave us that. But to give the government its due, for a long time, there has been a public-private vaccine response to pandemics. It goes back to 2007, 2008. And this is not a new thing. It's been around. The government promises to buy vaccine so that people can afford to make it when you're in the private sector. There's this thing called the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, or BARDA, which is the tip of the spear in the government to try to get this stuff done. It was around 13 years ago when I was there trying to work with them getting pandemic preparedness. It's still there. So Trump did his thing in regard to the government as a whole, the government writ large, helped to put this together. And what they did is they promised to buy $1.9 billion worth of vaccine from Pfizer and others, but from Pfizer, so that if and when the vaccine came around, there'd be no worries about paying for all of the work you have to do to get it done. And was Trump responsible for Pfizer getting it done this fast? No, Pfizer was responsible for Pfizer getting it done this fast. But did the government have a role in stabilizing the market so that this could happen? Absolutely. Was that Trump's doing? He was in office when it happened, but the process for doing that happened and started more than a decade ago. So is it good? Yeah, it's all good. Now what happens? Because the vaccine, when it is produced, and Pfizer says, and we'll talk about how they could do that, Pfizer says they can produce 100 million doses by the beginning of January, they say. If the safety data that we haven't seen yet, because it's just a press release, matches the efficacy, which we don't know yet because it's just a press release, but if all of those things happen, then 100 million doses of vaccine might start to be available at the beginning of January. Keep in mind, there's 330 million people in the United States, and you need 2 doses of this. So that doesn't mean everybody gets vaccinated on January 3rd.
No.
All right, but it's coming. And so if you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, it makes it much easier to put up with what you have to do in order to get there.
Yes.
Now, this particular vaccine is a little bit unusual.
Woof.
It's a messenger RNA, mRNA vaccine.
Ah, okay.
Okay, what does that mean? Typically, in the old flu vaccine, for example, the way you generally do it is you grow the flu virus in eggs, and that's where most of the eggs in Connecticut go.
Oh,
it's to the virus industry so they can grow their virus there. But you make an inactivated virus.
All right.
You make a virus that doesn't work anymore, and then you inject that into somebody's body, and their immune system creates antibodies to that virus.
All right.
And that's how you become immunized. Okay? And so growing the virus and activating it, making sure it's safe, and, it takes a long time. The proteins that come from the body to make this virus are created by the cells, and they're created by messenger RNA. So the Pfizer vaccine, the mRNA vaccines, to simplify it, to the point where it's not like totally there, but to simplify it, you take the mRNA, not the virus. You inject that into the body. Mm-hmm. And then when the cells get the mRNA, they start putting this little spike protein that happens to be the same spike protein that's on a coronavirus, but it's on your cell now.
All right. Awesome.
And then the body starts making antibodies against that spike protein.
Okay.
So you still get neutralizing antibodies. It's just made a different way than injecting with virus. And because it's an mRNA beginning to how this happens, you can make it in the lab. You can cook it in the lab. You don't have to worry about safety because you can't get the total virus sick from it.
Yes. Okay.
Although we have something to say about that in a second.
Really?
And so you can make a lot of it. You can make it quickly. And that's how Pfizer can ramp up production and get it done so fast. You don't have to worry about how many eggs does Connecticut really have and how long is it going to take to grow the virus and what if it's a bad batch and, so on and so forth. It's a completely different way of making a vaccine. Has it been done before? I'm not sure it's ever been done before. So doing this at warp speed is not a bad name. This is just like, let's do this completely differently because usually it takes 5 to 6 years to develop a vaccine, but we need it now, and this is what we're going to do. And so, fine. That's how they did it. Now, it could go bad. That's why you have to check for safety. What if the body does, in fact, start producing antibodies, but they're not strong enough to actually stop the virus? If anything, they just actually make you sicker.
Oh, well, no, we don't like that.
We don't want that. That's why you have to check for safety, not just for efficacy. So that part doesn't seem to be a worry in the preliminary data that they claim they have that nobody has seen, and that's cool. So could things go bad? Well, yeah, but in theory, but in practice, if you get lots of tens of thousands of people volunteering and it turns out that they don't get sick and it seems safe, then sure, go ahead with this. That's why the news this morning was so promising. And that's why Don Jr. was so upset. Why couldn't you say this last week? You deliberately didn't say it last week. Well, because you didn't have the information last week. And they're going to take their time and not do things according to your timetable because, that's how America normally works. You're just used to having everything go your way because you say so. And that's not how it goes with international companies that are also responsible for producing vaccine for the rest of the world. So I'm sorry, Don Jr., but that's not how it works. If it ever worked before, it certainly was your theme while your dad was in office, but it doesn't work that way anymore. Bye.
Yeah, I don't know. There was varied response from the Trump side. Someone pointing out here that on the one hand, you have Don Jr. saying this is a plot against Donald Trump to hold off on announcing the vaccine until after he had lost the election, which, by the way, he actually won, which is kind of an interesting position to take if he won, and what's the problem? And on the other hand, they have Mike Pence, who had a somewhat different response, which was, of course, that everybody should come out and thank President Trump for inventing the vaccine on his watch.
Science.
Yes, and coming up with it himself, and, of course, forging the public-private partnership that made it all possible, although Pfizer has since told everybody that, we didn't participate in Operation Warp Speed from that side of the equation. We weren't, our research wasn't funded by the government. We do have a distribution deal. That's good. But then again, of course, what if the deal is send all the vaccine to Four Seasons Total Landscaping, and they'll hand it out as they're mowing everyone's lawn? That would be a bad situation.
So let me just read to you this very brief couple of paragraphs from MedPage Today, which is unfortunately behind a paywall. These candidates work through messenger RNA, instructing the recipient's own cells to produce the coronavirus spike protein on the surface. The immune system then recognizes these cells as foreign and mounts an immune response. I can make the body produce surface protein without even giving the body the virus. One of these scientists at one of these companies told MedPage Today, instead of giving you the computer, I give you the operating system.
Interesting. That's a nice parallel.
Right. Moderna's product, mRNA 1273, co-developed with NIH, induced a stronger neutralizing antibody response in patients compared with people recovering from the disease, according to phase 1 findings published in the New England Journal of Medicine. This candidate was the first to begin a phase 3 trial. Pfizer and BioNTech's mRNA candidate has also shown positive preliminary findings. That's the one that was announced today. So this article was from a couple of months ago. They launched their own phase 3 trial last week. The candidate encodes an optimized version of the whole spike protein that could produce more consistent responses across diverse populations in older adults, Pfizer said in a statement. Beyond side effects like fatigue and chills, which many vaccine candidates have been associated with, one risk with any vaccine that winds up ineffective is they can enhance disease, the process called antibody-dependent enhancement, where a vaccine generates antibodies and binds the virus but doesn't neutralize it, then enhance viral entry into the cell and increase viral replication. What if the spike protein works too well? The phenomenon has been linked to both dengue and respiratory syncytial virus, but the evidence is inconclusive whether the coronavirus poses a risk. Poor quality antibodies that bind the virus without neutralizing are one reason why the vaccine candidate often fails. Any ineffective vaccine in theory could do this, but in practice, not in the article, but me saying this, in practice this doesn't seem like that's the case. But that's why you have to check, and you can't just rush and start using it tomorrow.
All right. So
all right,
Trump
just
will be
so
calling
people are aware.
Rush
So it's an
and use it
mRNA
tomorrow.
vaccine. It's been already purchased by the federal government. Remember the story we always tell about how also Tamiflu worked
Tamiflu, right.
back in 2007-8. If the government buys it, the pharmacy can't sell it to you.
Interesting.
So you can't just give it to pharmacies for distribution. But in this particular case, because the government bought it, the cost to the consumer is nothing, zero. It's free.
Does that mean
all right? So when the vaccine does come out on the market, however it's going to be distributed, it's going to be free. There might be a administration charge. Sometimes you go to the doctor, you get charged $50 for your flu shot and $20 for the administration, nursing time, needles, syringes, cleanup, gowns and masks and stuff like that. So there could be an administration charge, and that administrative charge might actually be picked up by the insurance company. That remains to be seen. That's something more likely to happen under Biden than Trump, I would say.
I guess
but,
so.
We don't know that yet.
Well, even if it's just because of the timing, it's more likely to happen under Biden than Trump.
Well, Biden would push for it to be free.
But yes, that's true. He would actually do something to make it more affordable if it wasn't, but also, even if he didn't, he'll be president and the other guy won't.
Right. And today's the day that Biden announces his new coronavirus task force, which I presume will be led by Vivek Murthy, who is the previous Surgeon General.
I don't know.
And a good guy and somebody who has an interest in this.
There's a list.
And there's a lot of scientists who are on the sidelines waiting to be part of the effort as soon as they are asked. So that is all obviously, very, very good news.
Anthony Fauci has to be inherited by Biden first before he can be put on the team, because he's currently an employee of the Donald Trump federal government.
Right. Executive editor of the Washington Examiner, Philip Klein, took a look at the Donald Trump statement and said, this is the opposite of helpful.
Okay. That's usually the case.
So people, and Philip has a long-standing interest in just following the health situation, as always. And most of the docs online that I follow said, this is absolutely, really promising. It's not BS, but we still have a long way to go before we find out stuff. And, before I go today, we should also note that now that Biden is president, president-elect, but, shorthand, now that he's president and Trump's lost, because whatever Trump does doesn't really matter anymore. The weak Supreme Court case coming up on the Affordable Care Act, as Nicholas Bagley writes today in USA Today, remains to be seen in terms of what the Supreme Court does with that. Jennifer Jacobs writes under Biden, his administration will have to decide whether to investigate Trump with the Department of Justice. Of course, Tish James is ready to do that with New York State. On January 20th, Trump loses immunity from federal indictment, and they could re-examine campaign finance violations. Even if it's not big ball stuff, they could do small ball stuff and sort of say, what, the Hatch Act is real and we need to strengthen it. There's a bunch of stuff that they could do besides just looking the other way. And Bill Barr will be out. So a lot of good stuff is coming, but I'm just trying to say there's still a lot of work to be done. And just because people are dancing in the street doesn't mean all this other stuff goes away. Not the pandemic, not the issues of whether or not Trump actually violated the law, rules, and other things, and how those guardrails need to be rebuilt. What happens with the Affordable Care Act and what we're going to do about that. And, of course, how Congress is going to wind up being settled. All of that stuff is out there, and a lot of work to do for the grown-ups now that the grown-ups are back, or at least coming back.
Yep, there is. There's quite a bit. Some people making it more difficult than others. We'll cover that, I guess, in the next hour. But you likely heard the news that the what do they even call it now? Government. It used to be the General Services Administration, GSA, which is now.
I still think
like 10 years ago they changed the name, and I still don't remember it. But
it's still the Triborough Bridge. Right, I don't care what they call it.
But
it'll always be the Bronx Zoo, and it's the GSA. And no, the head of that is not helping by refusing to sign a confirmatory letter that allows information to flow to the Biden campaign for transition purposes. That's the story there, as I understand it.
Yeah.
But transition is going to happen anyway. Still one.
Yes, the transition goes forward anyhow. And we may be overstating the case. The head of the GSA, not a helpful person, and she's been in our spotlight before, chiefly over the lease of the old post office pavilion where they built the Trump Hotel in D.C., and just sort of her weird, unique interpretation of the clause in the lease, which ordinarily would prevent it from being leased to a government employee, and her declaration that, no, president doesn't work for the government. Completely different.
Right.
So she's a controversial figure, but I don't think that she's actually doing anything that wouldn't be expected of any GSA head at the moment. The networks don't tell her what to do. The call has been made, but there's some official action that kind of needs to take place, which ordinarily is taken care of by conceding the election. That will do the
But he's
trick.
never going to concede.
Right.
That's really the issue here.
That's the problem.
So how do you do this when you can't just wait until January 20th to do some of this stuff?
You can't. But of course, one, the casting of the electoral votes will help a great deal. That will change things, and then the counting of the votes. But in 2000, when we were in suspended animation for so long, waiting for the answer, they similarly didn't begin the transition process, and GSA didn't issue the orders the same way. So we have actually been here before. It might not necessarily be just simply that the GSA is digging in their heels and saying, no, Trump won. They're just standing there saying, there are some certain triggers that have to happen in order for us to be able to move this forward, and they haven't happened. And kind of, I don't think she's, innocently looking around saying, what should I do necessarily? But anyway, it's not the worst thing in the world, and it may be that a lot of the transition work ends up being privately funded at the beginning, but it's a pretty major problem. Not that we can't turn it into something usable. You all heard Joe Biden the other night say what the first priority of the transition was going to be, and it's the coronavirus. And the longer that GSA, for whatever reason. Right, exactly. As long as they hold this money up, then that's less work that can be done dealing with the coronavirus, the top priority as announced by the president-elect. And if you would like to go into the 2 Georgia special Senate elections, once again blocking serious progress and coronavirus relief, then I guess I know what to do with the election that's happening there. And if you want it that way, we can do it that way. How long do you want to make this last? And we'll see what they say to that. So if they want to block it again, the opportunity is there for them. Okay, well, it may be that Abby has put a lid on Greg's availability today. Is that right? Okay.
Two quick things, though.
Sure. Oh, okay. One
which
being
have
Abby.
just gone by my mailbox here, which I thought was kind of interesting. The first is from Deborah Blum,
Okay.
who notes that the governor of Utah has declared a COVID-19 emergency, issues a mask mandate. We cannot afford to debate the issue. And I don't see Don Jr. tweeting, isn't this interesting that this happened right after the election?
Yeah. Well,
But
that is interesting.
It's interesting that this happened right after the election. After refusing for months to issue a mask mandate, Utah Governor Gary Herbert issued an indefinite order for Utahns to wear masks in businesses as of now. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's number one. The other story, I'm sorry, I can't help it. It's like right here. I have to bring it up, and it's Jake Sherman. Let me just edit this so I can bring it up to you. There it is.
All right.
You thought it couldn't get any weirder, but you were wrong.
I was.
A man featured at Giuliani press conference at the Four Seasons Landscaping is a convicted sex offender.
Well, maybe he worked at the porn store.
Fantasy Island that was next door.
Can you work there? I mean, I guess you're not barred from that. There's no kids in there.
The first person Rudy Giuliani, the attorney for President Donald Trump, called up as a witness to baseless allegations of vote counting shenanigans in Philadelphia during a press conference last week is a sex offender who for years has been a perennial candidate in New Jersey.
Oh, candidate for what?
For being a sex
offender,
I guess.
Pervert. Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. I thought we were going to talk about the guy
that was just out now. So I'm not saying that the Four Seasons press conference didn't go the way they intended, but it may be that didn't go the way it intended. So let's bookend the entire segment here. We started with that. We'll finish with that. Oh my God.
I thought you might be going to. I saw the UK paper, The Independent, was reporting that there was a guy at the press conference in his underwear, which I thought
maybe it was this guy.
Yeah, I thought it might, but I think it's a different guy. So there was one sex offender, one guy in his underwear, and one porn store, and what a mix! It's fantastic. All right, well planned there.
Trenton Mayor
Reed totally going to get you the
Gsa said in a phone interview, I started watching it. All of a sudden, it's like there's this guy, there's this perennial candidate claiming to live in Philadelphia, and Giuliani claiming him to be a poll watcher.
Well, okay, I'll just leave it there.
So
he may be one. I don't know. Okay.
Amazing. People don't pay attention to who they are. They're just trying to get bodies, particularly if it's a white organizer. This time, I guess he was on the Republican side because he's been hired by Clinton in the past.
The doctor at Ohio State Wrestling was a poll watcher, I think.
Yeah, you never know.
Anyway.
Richard Strauss.
I'm going to get out of here. Yeah, show's over.
Show's over. We're going. If we do any more of this, we'll probably get banned by the... federal agency to make sure that you don't say weird stuff on the air committee.
Still got 2 months left to do that to me.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, that's surprising. Well, that's shocking. How about that? We'll say that.
Anyway, that's the story. I'm going to look this guy up. I'm sticking to it. There's going to be a lot less
that guy's
chaos
sticking
from
everything.
now on. We know what's going on. That's the summary from the week. And remember, Monday shows are always difficult. There's so much damn chaos to summarize. Did the best we could, and then we'll see you on Wednesday.
All right.
But our theory of the case of the election turns out to be relatively, that's what happened.
Yes.
Oh, here's one more. Let me just throw this because this will just take a second.
Good.
It may be that the coronavirus was, in fact, the biggest impact event of the election, but not completely in the ways that we thought.
All right.
It affected everything.
What ways
it's why Biden won, among other reasons, although Trump was already trailing. But it would have been a much closer election without the coronavirus.
Okay.
But when we looked at the results and as they came in, we said, well, maybe it was just people who really got sick and tired of being under lock and key and, wanted to go out and pretend the virus didn't exist. And there might be an element of that. But there's some data now developing that said, no, the biggest development was that the coronavirus, because the Republicans ignored it, allowed them to go ahead and register people and do all their, get out the vote stuff. And the Democrats had to do it completely different. And the Republican style, the old style, worked a whole lot better than the Democrat new style of trying to just do it all online. And it may be as simple as that. A lot of people came out for this election, but the Republican get out the vote was better, and that might have been virus induced because they did the door knocking, they did the all this stuff with exceptions. Some of the Democratic progressive guys ignored that and just ahead and did the door knocking too. But that may have been just a practical effect that you see in the numbers. And by the way, that doesn't mean that philosophically America has rejected the Democrat. Well, no, actually what happened is the virus just interfered with the normal process and the Democrats won anyway.
How interesting. I'd like to, it'll be interesting.
That's why you should never do hot takes until all the votes come back.
Yeah, that's true too. That's also good advice. It's going to take some time to figure out what it means and whether anybody in the absence of coronavirus will still argue that, I guess now it'll be very difficult, but argue that digital outreach is somehow better or more effective or a better use of money than traditional door knocking. That's going to be hard to argue. But there are so many, there are fewer consultants who get paid for door knocking consultations than digital, which is too bad because a lot of the people who get paid for digital work are people we know and like a great deal and who haven't been paid sufficiently for all the work they've done in the past. So, all right, well, we'll let them settle that because we're not getting any of that money, and let them do the work and write the articles and we'll read them to you. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate your hanging around to add those two things. Hope Abby has a calm afternoon coming up. Well, still late morning, and we'll see you on Wednesday. So take care. We'll be right back. I guess everything's muted. Shop is closed on Greg's end.
No, much more here.
Oh, okay. You just didn't want to say anything.
I don't like to hang up and make that noise until we're up.
Okay. Well, just say bye. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm starting to suspect that there's something wrong with my connection to Pocket via Twitter. I know for sure, of course, I had to have put away the story on the GSA in Pocket, and yet I don't see it here. So I've called up another one during the brief break, this may or may not be the one that I put aside originally, but anyway, the Washington Post covering the story, they should have it pretty well handled. A little-known Trump appointee is in charge of handling transition resources, or rather handing transition resources to Biden, and she isn't budging. And let's run through it because there's an awful lot of excitement about it, and I think it's not necessarily warranted at the moment. I think things will come out okay in the end. Two, that's the way I like to do it. Two, we've been there before. It might not necessarily mean, though she's a suspect character to begin with, but it might not necessarily mean that she's acting out as a Trump partisan necessarily, but there's other evidence from prior cases that she does kind of act out that way. But let's run through it, and we'll figure out what's happening here. Look at this. It's a crazy looking... there's always crazy looking photos of Michelle Bachmann out there, but I'll share the live listeners will see. I've just retweeted somebody who did one of those, how it started, how it's going things, and I guess there's some, less than flattering, maybe she was doing a Zoom call or something, images of Michelle Bachmann out there, which is unfair perhaps to Michelle Bachmann, but to hell with Michelle Bachmann, right? And fairness for her. That ain't happening. Anyway, where were we? Yes, GSA. Washington Post, it's Lisa Rayne, Jonathan O'Connell, Josh Dawsey on the byline. A Trump administration appointee is refusing to sign a letter allowing President-elect Joe Biden's transition team to formally begin its work this week in another sign the incumbent president has not acknowledged Biden's victory and could disrupt the transfer of power. And there is that. There could definitely be a disruption, a delay, and they ought definitely on the Biden team and on the Ossoff team and the Warnock team make mention of the fact that there's some serious work on prepping for response to the coronavirus that will be delayed, and people will, contract the virus and die as a result of these games. But I don't know whether it may be premature to say that it's all political games by this General Services Administration, GSA, chief, even though she's a suspect character to begin with. And I would say, I'm a little hesitant to engage in, say, like what I think the Lincoln Project is engaging in, along with a few others, picking up on other people's initiation of this work, but circulating pictures of the woman who heads GSA and along with her Twitter handle and email contacts so that people will pester her, pressure her, what have you, to release these funds. And it does technically, I guess, come down to the fact that there's this letter, but I don't know if it really sets up exactly this way, that the administration appointee, as they point out, the Trump administration appointee, refusing to sign a letter, like the letter is out there and exists and is like I don't know, certainly not Trump writing the letter or dictating a letter and saying, sign this thing. It would be generated from the GSA, and I'm sure that it's ready to roll because that's part of preparing for an election in the GSA. And it's not like the whole GSA is behind her pushing and saying, you got to sign this thing. And she's saying, I personally refuse. She's got some ground here, a leg to stand on, which she would use the ground to do the standing with. You see, I'm mixing the metaphors here. The administrator of the General Services Administration, the low-profile agency in charge of federal buildings, has a little-known role when a new president is elected: to sign paperwork officially turning over millions of dollars, as well as giving access to government officials, office space and agencies, and equipment authorized for the taxpayer-funded transition teams of the winner. It amounts to a formal declaration by the federal government outside of the media of the winner of the presidential race. But by Sunday evening, almost 36 hours after media outlets projected Biden as the winner, GSA Administrator Emily Murphy has written no such letter, which calls into question the whole framing at the beginning of this piece. That's actually my point. I think the Washington Post and other writers getting way out ahead of things. Trump administration appointee refusing to sign a letter. Well, the letter hasn't been written. So how many of you have signed letters that you haven't written yet? It's not really, a fair presentation of the case. I'm certainly no Trump defender here, but anyway, let's see if they get into more of the explanation. Why hasn't the letter been written? And I think the answer here, too, is answered, right? They just told us that the letter usually amounts to a formal declaration by the federal government outside of the media of the winner of the presidential race. And then their complaint is, well, it's been 36 hours since the media projected Biden as the winner. Yes, you have your media on one hand and your government on the other, and there's nothing that's happened in the government that declares Biden the winner yet. And that's ordinarily the case in every election, because what would be the government's first opportunity to declare Biden the winner? It would be, at the earliest, you would think it would be the casting of the electoral votes in December. But work gets done before then all the time. Why does that happen? And that has to do with the weird role that we give to concessions straddling both media practice and effective governmental practice. When a candidate concedes, the part we see is the speech. Now, I suspect, I've not been inside of a campaign war room in the middle of a concession. But I've been in the war room, not the war room, the boiler room is probably the better place to describe what happens in some of these places. I'm not the top strategist guy in the war room. What should we do about this strategy or that strategy? But the boiler room, about how campaigns execute and wind up on election day and thereafter, that I have seen to some extent. But still, I'm not 100% certain that this is an absolute necessity. But it's not the speech on television that by itself triggers the ability of the GSA to act or the ability of elections offices to make their calls with certainty. But part of the game is, one, you call the other candidate and say, I concede, and then you make your concession speech. That's part of it. And the other part of it is you call the elections authorities in your state and say, yes, the candidate has conceded the election, which is something that the elections offices can then use to say, all right, well, as opposed to the round-the-clock, full speed ahead, no breaks vote counting that's been going on up to this point, we can now finish the job of counting the votes. We still will count the votes because we do want to know how many people voted for which one of them, but it's no longer essential that we count them all as quickly as possible around the clock, drinking coffee and taking no bathroom breaks. But because one candidate has conceded, in other words, one of the two people with the right to demand that work continue has just called and said, we no longer demand that work continue. And generally speaking, the person who has won the election and accepts the concession will likewise say, given that the result that's going to be reported by the State Board of Election or whatever we call you in the state or Commonwealth, what have you, is going to be that I won. Yeah, I'm okay with you stopping the emergency schedule counting and just get around to the regular schedule counting afterward, just so long as you are agreed you'll be certifying me as the winner. Yes? Okay, great. Then count at whatever pace you want. And that's kind of what happens after that. Well, let's see. By the way, in case you were wondering about the genuineness of the photo of Michelle Bachmann being circulated by some nefarious corners of Twitter, including me, it apparently comes from Right Wing Watch circulating her video in which she says here, former Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann calls on God, and I don't know whether he's listening or not, to, quote, smash the delusion, Father, that Joe Biden is our president. He is not. That's kind of yikes-inducing, but then again, she's a yikes-inducing sort of person. All right, let me make sure I have that one available to share with you later on. It probably doesn't need to get tweeted around right now because you probably don't have a hard time believing that Michelle Bachmann would say such a thing. But if you're looking for it, Right Wing Watch is the place to find it on Twitter, and I invite you to do so. Okay, so back to the GSA story, which you see why I wanted to do this one. Process story. And the story begins to fall apart, and you'll find it's nice. You'll find yourself less mad at the GSA, though you're certainly perfectly welcome to send her angry emails, because why not? That's what she gets the big bucks for. So, by Sunday evening, 36 hours after the media outlets projected Biden as the winner, which means nothing to the government, but concessions do, and in this case here, the concession would likewise work to allow GSA to go ahead. I don't know whether the campaign officials on the losing campaign have to actually place a call to GSA to say, yes, we've conceded, go ahead, or not, or whether they can take the general concession and to the electoral boards to be their signal. But it wouldn't surprise me if, real campaigns that have actual organizations have a list of phone calls that have to be made immediately after concessions to, notify the 50 state elections boards and every place else in the territories. And also, for presidential races, probably the GSA and maybe a few other places as well. Secret Service, for instance, they don't just immediately disappear, but I'm sure that they want to know too, so that they can schedule work schedules for their agents, etc. All right. Well, at any rate, No such letter has been written at this point by Emily Murphy or anybody else. Well, actually, I shouldn't say anybody else. There's a fake GSA letter apparently circulating on Twitter, pretty quickly identified as a fake. I don't know what it says. I didn't look at it yet, but that didn't happen. So the letter hasn't been written. That's part of the reason why it hasn't been signed. And the Trump administration, though, here's where, there's certainly, I'm sure Trump is happy with this idea and wants it to continue. Let's find out what they have to say here. The Trump administration, in keeping with the president's failure to concede the election, has no immediate plans to sign one. This could lead to the first transition delay in modern history, except in 2000, when the Supreme Court decided a recount dispute between Al Gore and George W. Bush in December. So, I mean, even that sentence kind of falls apart. It's the first transition delay in modern history, except for the one that actually, like 60% of voters remember very well and would have said, wait, what about 2000? Oh, yeah, no, we acknowledge that happened then. Okay, so great. This is the first time it's happened in modern history, except for the one that happened yesterday, which you all know about. An ascertainment has not yet been made. Pamela Pennington, the spokeswoman for GSA, said in an email, and its administrator will continue to abide by and fulfill all requirements under the law. The GSA statement left experts on federal transitions to wonder when the White House expects the handoff from one administration to the next to begin. When the president has exhausted his legal avenues to fight the results, or the formal vote of the Electoral College on December 14th. There are 74 days as of Sunday until the Biden inauguration on January 20th. No agency head is going to get out in front of the president on transition issues right now. True. Said one senior administration official who spoke on condition of anonymity because he's not supposed to be talking at all. The official predicted that agency heads will be told not to talk to the Biden team. And that's another aspect of this, pardon me, totally related, of course, to the GSA's refusal to let funding flow. And remember, this is all federal funding that's budgeted and appropriated and ready to go. And the federal government pays typically for the transition, and everybody gets office space and government emails and all of that sort of stuff. And, not that they can't do this work. It's just they might have to pay for it privately for a while. They might even be able to get reimbursed for it later on. I don't know. But I assume so. But I suppose the Trump administration continued to make that difficult too. And then, all right, fine. When January 21st rolls around, here's your money. And, there might be plenty of money left. For all I know, the Biden team was very adept at fundraising. But yes, agency heads aren't going to get out in front of the president on the transition. And it's entirely possible that they might say, no, hold off as long as you can. And even after, honestly, if the money were already flowing, it's the president can, if he's a jerk ass, direct the current agency heads, part of the transition team, as you know. You remember it from probably really from the transition from Obama to Trump, that there are what they called like landing teams, essentially, just borrowing, I guess, from military lingo or whatever, but send a party ahead, essentially. These are the people that I anticipate taking over the Department of Energy. They go, even if you don't necessarily have a secretary in mind, there are others who you anticipate will be working at that department. And you might recall that the only time the reason it made the news in the Obama to Trump transition period was that, of course, it would take a pretty significant amount of organization and forethought by a real and organized campaign to have any idea within a couple of days of the announcement of the results of the election, which means that you would have to have worked on it beforehand, to who's going to be in place at the Department of Energy, who are the likely deputy secretaries and undersecretaries of the Department of Energy, Department of Agriculture, Department of Veterans Affairs, State Department, etc. But Trump won being totally disorganized and not having a professional campaign. And two, probably still right up until election day thinking, no, I'm not going to win, had no plan in place. That's how that terminology made the news, as I recall, in 2016, was that nobody was showing up for these transition landing party teams at any of the major departments because they didn't know what the hell to do. Who's going to be? I don't know who's going to be in the State Department. I never thought about it. There's an awful lot of work that goes into these presidential campaigns, and if you're still scratching your head, I guess this is a good way to connect an old story and some loose threads that are probably floating around in your head. If you're still scratching your head about why Mitt Romney would have said in his idiotic fashion that he had binders full of women circulating among his campaign, the binders are prepared by people who are preparing for a transition in case you win, because you could, and you don't want to be caught flat-footed with a cold start as your prospect, knowing that you're going to be taking over running the United States government. There's a national security issue. You got to be prepared for that stuff. And so while lots of people on your team want to be doing the work of, strategizing about what's going to be our policy, a lot of the heavy lifting and grunt work is being done behind the scenes in unglamorous places to prepare for the possibility that you might have to take over the federal government. Trump never did it. That's how we learned, most of us, about how much work goes into a transition. But yeah, there were hints out there before. The binders full of women. That's the work that's done by, not necessarily in that fashion, but that these are people who we think, if we would like to make a concerted effort to populate the new or the proposed Romney administration with an equitable number of women, it's a nice idea, right? This is how it'll happen. And the binder, it's an unusual binder to have, but I'm sure inside was, okay, well, at the department of this, we have these people. At the department of that, we have those people. And put it all together, and you got something to work with here. Trump never did it. Biden will already have done it and is ready to roll forward, so fine. Let's see. Okay, so Monica tells us here that the GSA has, I guess, have they changed their mind here? Let's see. She just did announce the release. Pressure worked, it seems. She's sent me on the tweet here from Cheryl Lynn, who says, it's done. Trump appointed GSA. Emily caved under pressure and has made $5.3 million available. And there's a letter attached. Now I'm just hoping that that's not the fake one. And I assume it's not, based on the fact that I guess this too is, well, let's see. Or it's coming in response to Representative Eric Swalwell's criticism of their not having been, of this not having been released. But yeah, I haven't looked at the letter here, so I can't tell you whether it's genuine or not. And I guess really what I ought to do is I should search around and see whether there's the GSA fake letter is someplace for me to compare it to. Let's see. We've got this tweet from 47 minutes ago. All right, let's see. Here's one that says, if you see this online, it's fake. Look at the website. It says, it says GAS, not GSA. Let's take a look at the one that was attached in the tweet here. Oh, the type is far too small for me to be able to tell what's going on here. So I can't tell whether it's the fake one or not. Oh, hold on a second. I'm going to get way down close to it. And you know what? That one does look like the GAS one after all, which could just be a typo, but you'd think that in the signature block, they'd have worked that one out by now. Well, so it could be a disappointment that we're looking at here. And again, nothing would have changed in terms of the status of the campaign and the transition. So I guess it's entirely possible that we might have seen the fake one again here. All right. At any rate, well, you were forewarned, and now it's going to be It's all going to be okay. So where were we? Right. No agency official is going to get out ahead. But it is true. I guess this is where we were going with this one. The official predicted that agency heads will be told not to talk to the Biden team. That still can happen too. Trump neglected to send anybody to talk to the Obama team, but Obama was not going to issue any order saying don't talk to the Trump team. But he could have, and these people still work for the federal government and for Donald Trump, and he can, because, who cares about norms? There's no federal law that says the current head of the Department of State or what have you, anyone you choose, has to talk to the transition team personnel that land there. Their offices are paid for. They'll get some email addresses. They ordinarily would be entitled statutorily, pending a security clearance, although many of the people who are in these landing parties are in the landing parties because they've already had security clearances in the past and may even still have them currently. But they may have entitlement to review the documents, but you don't have to talk to them. There's not much they can do to make anybody talk. So they'll probably continue not to. The decision has turned attention to Murphy, whose 4-year tenure has been marked by several controversies involving the president, an unusually high profile for an agency little known outside of Washington. Her action now has to be condemned, said Representative Gerald Connolly, who leads a House Oversight Panel on Federal Operations. It's behavior that is consistent with her subservience to the wishes of the president himself, and it is clearly harmful to the orderly transition of power. The delay has implications both practical and symbolic. By declaring the apparent winner of a presidential election, the GSA administrator releases computer systems and money for salaries and administrative support for the mammoth undertaking, see, it is mammoth, of setting up a new government. That's $9.9 million for it this year. So I guess that also, well, actually, they would have made a pretty good choice. I thought that the letter we were looking at said that they were releasing $53 million, but it does say 5.3, which would be a reasonable first tranche, I suppose, or tranche, as Greg likes to put it, of a $9.9 million figure. Anyway, transition officials get government email addresses. They get office space at every federal agency. They can begin to work with the Office of Government Ethics to process financial disclosure and conflict of interest forms for their nominees. That's a good thing to get out ahead of, too. So that's the usual work during the transition. By the way, in case you were wondering, yes, Monica says, gosh, I'm sorry. Sorry to have spread a fake letter. Some frowny emojis. It's okay. It's happening all over the place. And you know what? As fake goes, it's not a bad one. I'm just curious about who would have spent any time at all creating one and what did they think was going to happen. As a result, I don't know. Or, again, it is possible that I don't know who are the people saying it's fake. I understand the evidence they're offering, which is that the name of the government services, General Services Administration website at the bottom of the signature block is wrong, but this is the Trump administration. It could have been wrong for every letter generated by the GSA for the last 4 years, and they just never noticed it. I mean, it's good evidence that there's something fake about what's going on, but it's not conclusive. So you might not yet be wrong, Monica, so don't worry about that. We parse things pretty closely here. Well, this one thing. I usually get fooled all the time. I parse nothing. So, okay. Let's see. Also, of course, the landing parties, as I've described them before, get access to senior officials, both political appointees of the outgoing administration and career civil servants, who relay an agency's ongoing priorities and projects, upcoming deadlines, problem areas, and risks. The federal government, is a $4.5 trillion operation. And while the Biden team is not new to government, the access is critical, experts said, and it's all on hold for now. Now that the election has been independently called for Joe Biden, we look forward to the GSA administrator quickly ascertaining Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as the president-elect and vice president-elect, a Biden transition spokesman said in an email. America's national security and economic interests depend on the federal government signaling clearly and swiftly that the United States government will respect the will of the people and engage in a smooth and peaceful transition of power, which, of course, Trump has never promised was going to happen in the first place. But that's the way things are supposed to work. They're apparently not working that way. I'm not sure what independent confirmation that they're even talking about. Anyway, there's more, and probably, we'll continue with it a little bit more on the other side just because it's got good process stuff in it. And we'll move on to some of the other crazy stories as well. Anyway, I would recommend don't spend your time or waste any of your time harassing this GSA employee. It will work, and there's nothing your angry emails can make it happen. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Okay, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, so let's read a little bit more because I always love this stuff. This is not only is a process, it's kind of behind-the-scenes esoteric process that nobody ever pays any attention to, and it requires a crisis to get people to pay attention to it. We'll take advantage of the crisis and help you pay attention to it, and then when you're old and gray and your grandchildren say, this has never been done before, you'll be able to patiently explain to them not only that it has, but what it means, why it happened, and either, we hope in the end, why it's not a big deal or why you shouldn't be, I don't know, what will we be doing in that day and age? Hyper mailing, I don't know, the GSA administrator to harass her about this stuff. Okay, anyway, let's see. As the campaign wound down, we'll start back here, President Trump gave signals that he would not easily hand over the reins to his successor if there was one. That's interesting phrasing, and I'm not certain if there was one, what? A successor, you mean? Anyway, but for people who have been through them, a presidential transition is a massive undertaking requiring discipline, decision-making, and fast learning under the smoothest circumstances. Each day lost puts the new government behind schedule. True, if there's ever been anyone who could work around such a delay, I guess it would be Biden and the Biden team. There's an entire Democratic administration essentially in exile they weren't anticipating, well, maybe they were actually. Quite honestly, up until November, what day was the election in 2016? November 9th. There was, obviously, not just because of the surprise outcome of the election, but because this is what a campaign team does all the time. Hillary Clinton would have had a whole plan set. If Biden had parachuted in at the last second somehow and run for president completely to his own surprise, he would have been able to borrow, if necessary, the Hillary Clinton binders that they would have formulated. But they didn't need to do that. He knew he was running for president. He knows how government works. People who know how government works are on his team. They may well have just, beamed down from the mothership of the Hillary Clinton campaign, even possibly, and taken the binders with them. But they're certainly perfectly capable of generating their own binders. They don't need to depend on Hillary Clinton to do that for them. But you would not be surprised, let's say, to find out that there's probably a considerable overlap between the work that both campaigns would have done independently. Because, they come from normal world where people have done this work already. Nobody's going to be surprised by that. People will be pointing fingers and yelling if they are, let's say, ultra progressives, and they want to see more ultra progressives in a Biden administration. And to their great surprise, no doubt, they'll find out that he's not quite as progressive as you are. But anyway, we'll have those fights later on. So, where were we? As the campaign wound down, Trump said he was going to make trouble, right? But for people who've been through these transitions, they know a lot of work has to be done. The transition process is fundamental to safely making sure the next team is ready to go on day one, said Max Stier, I guess, or maybe Stier, but Stier, President and Chief Executive of the nonpartisan Partnership for Public Service. Hooray. Sounds nice, right? Which has set up a presidential transition center and shares advice with the Biden and Trump teams. I wonder if anybody takes it. It's critical that you have access to the agencies before you put your people in place. I'm sometimes curious about things like this. Just total aside here. Max Stier, or Stier, I don't know. President and Chief Executive of Partnership for Public Service. This is linked here, and I'd like to go there. How does that get money? Just curious. I'm not saying like he's a corrupt guy or anything. I'm just sort of like, who would give money to that? I mean, I like public service, but I'm not giving him any money for the partnership. I'm sure rich people who have, are looking around for philanthropic opportunities, I guess. But I don't know. This is one of those things that occurs to me every time I go through one of these our own fundraising crises. Oh, by the way, we're after the election now. So, okay. If you've already given money to Ossoff and Warnock, I guess now's the time. I guess I may have to wait until this is over. Everybody give me your money. How's that? Is that a good pitch? I'm going to have to work on a better script for this. But I did say we were going to be doing more fundraising after the election. But this comes up now in the context of my aside thought on this. Like, does this guy ever have to do this? Does Max Stier spend any amount of his time running around begging people for money? Does it just show up? I don't know. It's the sort of thing that makes me say, we can kind of, barely make it here. And, this guy calls himself president and CEO of this important sounding thing. And they have a website, and he's saying he shares advice with the Biden and Trump teams. And how do you make this happen? I'm just curious. This guy from out of nowhere, and it might be that nobody takes him seriously whatsoever, but the newspaper does. And then maybe is it just because he says he's nonpartisan and has a place that has an important sounding name, and my name is stupid sounding. And instead of Kagro in the Morning Show, if we were a partnership for even more public and even better, gooder service, would we have funding? How would we? I don't know. Anyway, not what we came here to discuss. The Biden team can move forward to get preliminary security clearances and begin FBI background checks on potential nominees requiring Senate confirmation. And I'm not 100% certain that they can do that. With the FBI, especially under this guy, what if Trump says, well, they're going to pay for it, right? I mean, normally they pay for it out of transition funds, but they don't have transition funds. So you should get paid up front. I don't want federal government money going to pay for FBI background checks for this guy who isn't even going to be president, he would think. I wonder about that. But ordinarily, they can go ahead and get security clearances or renew security clearances for people who already have them, whatever. But I guess it's not guaranteed. Another one of these things we really have to parse down. Did the reporters know? Did they get confirmation that the FBI can, in fact, begin to do preliminary security clearances and background checks for prospective Biden officials in the absence of this GSA letter, or are they just going on, well, that's always happened before? Good question. Another senior administration official who was not authorized to speak publicly said each agency has drafted detailed transition plans for a new administration, but they will not be released to the Biden team until a winner is formally declared. So even the agencies themselves have their own plans. Trump has been resistant to participating in a transition, fearing it is a bad omen. That's an interesting phrasing for that. But has allowed top aides to participate as long as the efforts do not become public, administration officials said, which is a weird combination of reaction and phrasing there. Where are we? That the president of the United States really thinks, well, I won the election, but if I allow the transition to go ahead, then I'll unwin it. Well, one, you didn't win, and two, that's not going to do it. Bad omen, but whatever. Anyway, but now he says, well, I will allow top aides to work with transition processes, but don't tell anybody. Okay. He's unlikely to concede he has lost or participate in traditional activities, the official said. That's probably true, and he's just going to play golf. My big test was, is he going to show up at the golf course during the week? It's interesting, and I can't tell which would be more despicable. Him just, effing off for good, like maybe that's a good thing, some people said, but and just saying, I'm going to play golf until the government won't pay me to play golf anymore? Or is it more pathetic in a way for him to like play golf on the weekends and then say, all right, it's Monday, back to work, when he's never been working at all in the first place? And but is he so delusional in a way that he just thinks, well, if I go back to work on Monday, then everyone will let me continue to be president next year too? And that's not really true. I don't know. I'm not certain which is the more pathetic. And by the way, for the contingent out there that say, let him go play golf. Good. I'm glad he's playing golf. He's on the golf course and not bothering anybody. He's distracted and he won't make any mischief so long as we keep him busy with golf. I understand, and it's probably good for the country, but shut up, F you, NIMBY, not in my backyard. Because this is happening in my backyard. One of my activities over the weekend, by the way, was using the Virginia Department of Health's online compliance forms to make reports about a certain local business establishment that isn't, following the masking ordinances requiring that patrons and employees alike wear masks on the premises, and 2, the screening that's supposed to be done, not an actual screening of every person that comes in, but you've been to businesses during this pandemic, haven't you? You haven't been just hiding at home the whole time, and you get there and there's a sign on the door that this is what passes for screening out there. If you've had a fever or a cough, that's not explainable by anything else. If you've traveled abroad in the last 14 days or had direct exposure to somebody with a positive COVID diagnosis, you're not permitted on the premises, right? And everybody just puts those up, and it's pro forma, and everybody kind of agrees that it's the honor system, etc. But yesterday and the day before, on Saturday, the President of the United States, we haven't mentioned this on today's show, another wacky development over the weekend. Mark Meadows, Chief of Staff at the White House, has COVID. Right? You all know this, but it's background information at this point. And, of course, he was all over the place, and he traveled all over the place with the president and the rest of the inner circle on Election Day and then the day after. And most importantly, I guess, for these purposes, they participated in the also totally violative of the Hatch Act election night party in the White House, which at one point was scheduled to be at the Trump Hotel, but then they canceled it and they moved it to the White House, which is a huge Hatch Act violation, but there's no such thing anymore, et cetera, et cetera. We didn't even discuss this whole story either. See, there's so many things to catch up on. By the way, one of the best theories I heard about why he was moving it from the Trump Hotel, where he could generate fees for himself and launder more campaign money into personal money by having the RNC and the Trump campaign rent the facilities of the Trump Hotel from himself so that he would get money. That's a big temptation to give up. Why not do that? Why move it from there to the White House? And, one answer was, well, the White House, although it's illegal for him to use it, he could use for free. He could steal it for free and therefore not run up any more campaign bills when the campaign was essentially bankrupt. That was one theory. The other theory, more interesting, I thought, that was circulating was, well, he is a businessman, and that is his business, the hotel. And the business, of course, behaves like a business. And being in Washington, D.C., has a mask mandate and would be reported to the Department of Health and be in trouble with the local authorities in D.C. if all the mask doubters and mask haters showed up for Donald Trump's big party there. They would put the business perhaps in jeopardy of whatever licensing it's got, or perhaps even have liability issues. And over at the White House, no such problem exists, or at least they're not personally Donald Trump's problems. If he owns the venue where they're having an unmasked event and there's liability that arises from it, liability settles with him. He doesn't want that, so he's going to put it on you as the taxpayer instead. Not that there will be any real liability for it because you can't sue the government, et cetera, for things like that anyway. But that was another interesting explanation. Anyway, to circle back around to that, Mark Meadows has COVID this whole time and shows up in this, 200, 300 person event in the East Room, indoors, unmasked, packed in like sardines in traditional seating, side by side, hardly anybody wearing any masks. Mark Meadows is there. By the way, also present in the room, I was looking at the photos, Newt and Callista Gingrich. And Callista, it looks like, was seated next to Ivanka. They got a real prominent place there. And right up in the front row. And now basically everybody who was there and in the presence of Mark Meadows and the other 4 or 5 staffers who also have become, or also were diagnosed with COVID-19 late last week and over the weekend. I don't know if we even know those names or whether there are more of them. I should look that up. They were all right there in the room with them. They all need to be quarantining. Now, I mentioned Newt Gingrich not just because, hooray, Newt Gingrich might have coronavirus, but 2 other things. One is, of course, Gingrich may have given it to everybody. We don't know because, recall, Callista is ambassador to the Holy See. In other words, the Vatican. Sure. So they're posted in Vatican City, one of the very few jurisdictions around the world which actually has a higher total case per 1 million population infection rate than the United States does. The U.S. currently stands at about 16th in the world. Just above that, 13th in the world is Vatican City. Now, that's largely because it's a statistical anomaly and there's 12 people in Vatican City. But, like I said, one of the other questions they always ask you, if you go through any screening or if you read the posted notices on the front door of any business, have you traveled abroad in the last 14 days? You have. Did you happen to come from someplace where they're even more infected with COVID than the United States, which is hard to do? You did. That is interesting. Well, have you been in close contact indoors, unmasked, let's say, with anybody else who's had a positive diagnosis of COVID-19 in the last 14? You have. Well, that is very interesting. Well, but who cares, right? You're all just in the same room. Well, did you know that Newt Gingrich was Donald Trump's golf guest anyway? I don't know if they were partners per se, but in this round on Saturday. So what I'm saying is, I know that you prefer that Donald Trump waste his time on the golf course and not meddle in anything else and stay busy that way. What I'm saying is, I live here. When are we going to stop these disease-carrying caravans into Loudoun County from heavily infected Washington, D.C., including people who just came from the Vatican, for God's sake, and were in close contact with a coworker positively diagnosed with COVID-19 in the last 4 days into this business? So I took advantage of the online form and let the Virginia Department of Health, the proper authorities in this case, know that there was a business operating in Loudoun County, Trump National Golf Club, that was, 1, not complying with masking requirements, as far as I could tell, and 2, admitting people who should be in quarantine to the business. And sure, you think you have to because he ostensibly, quote unquote, owns the place, and there's lots of disputes about that as well. But I don't want him in my county spreading COVID around here. We got enough problems as it is. That's a NIMBY issue, and I suppose we'll all take one for the team if I really felt like there was less mischief being done on the golf course. But that's just a cheap joke. So F that guy. Get out of my county. Don't come here and make people sick. Get lost. He thinks he's president of the United States. That isn't even true. So where did we leave off? I think we were still talking about the GSA. To go back. If you just hit the back button on your browser, you'll get back here with me. Hit the back button on my brain here, and we'll go back to, in a call on Friday with administration officials. Mary Gilbert, the head of the presidential transition team at the GSA, told colleagues the agency was in a holding pattern and not to host people from Biden teams until there is, quote, ascertainment. She gave no specific timeline on when it was expected. They could make it last until they could make it last until the counting of the electoral vote. You say the Electoral College has voted, but I don't see anything. Give me the paperwork, right? They finally take my lesson. Show me the paperwork. Well, it's in the mail. And it is. That's how it gets delivered, too. That's going to be really something. You want to watch a real trick? Get me Louis DeJoy on the phone. Lou, I want you to misdeliver the Electoral College votes. Just make them go away. God, what the hell happens then? I mean, they make a lot of copies of these certificates. I think they got this covered. I'm a process guy. I have been to the Electoral College voting. I have witnessed it myself. And here in Virginia. And I'm down to the state capitol in Richmond, and I went and I seen the damn thing. And one thing I learned there was that they make like 7 or 8 copies of the certificates. So, I don't know. I guess it's not going to work. Although I guess if you lose them all, then I suppose. Anyway, how did I get to do that? By the way, Evan Macbeth, who may or may not be a listener to the show. You might know him from Twitter as Paradox13VA. You might know him from Daily Kos as is he also that on Daily Kos? I don't even remember. He might be working under his real name there. He was for a while the Loudoun County Democratic Party chair, and therefore a friendly type of guy. And he knew when I was into the process thing, and he invited me. And he was an elector. That's how. And so he said, I can invite some guests. And he did, and one of them was me, and I watched. It was great. And anyway, they make like 8 copies of the things. One of them goes at least to the vice president, because he's the president of the Senate. That's Mike Pence. Now, one goes to the National Archives. One goes to, I don't know. We could look it up, and now I feel like I want to do it. But you'd have to lose a lot of letters. But they could make it happen. But anyway, point is there's nothing, that would say, I mean, if you really wanted to drag your feet and be a stickler because you're a process guy and not just a jerk, although you can be both, I am here as proof of that, you could say, no, we have to wait until they count the electoral votes in electoral college votes rather in Congress here in D.C. on January 6th. That would give almost no time for a transition. It would definitely screw some things up if people didn't find ways around it. Anyway, right. So no specific timeline given. The delay has already gummed up discussions on critical issues, including plans to distribute a possible coronavirus vaccine, this official said. So again, make it an issue down there in Georgia. And I've seen some other suggestions for issues in the Georgia races, including the lame duck Congress coming back and the Democratic House passing another coronavirus relief bill, actual checks for people to help them through the situation, knowing that the Republican Senate will block that action. It can also run down in Georgia, Ossoff and Warnock on, hey, Senators Loeffler and Perdue, why are you blocking coronavirus relief for everybody? We just had an election. You basically lost. I mean, you didn't lose this election, but your president lost. And part of the reason was he keeps refusing to actually help people get through the coronavirus pandemic. Plus, he's making it worse every day with everything he does and spreading it all over the place himself, personally, by the way. Why don't you tell Mitch McConnell that you're not going to vote with him to block this stuff, and that a motion to proceed to it was going to pass with your votes or whatever? And, people, you got to be a bit of a political junkie to make that sink in and make it work. But I'm sure it could be mass marketed in some other way. But between this and blocking the transition, which likewise could screw with a vaccine being delivered, today being such a big news day on the vaccine front, would be a great day to do that. I know that they're already executing that strategy down there. Everybody's watching what's happening with the vaccine, and apparently a huge rally on Wall Street, which Trump, of course, says is really about his impending victory. But, probably not, and it's about the coronavirus thing instead. So there you go. It's going to be blocking coronavirus vaccine distribution. And even if they weren't blocking the transition at this point, I guess you'd have to have worries about whether or not your coronavirus vaccine is going to show up in the right place, given the whole Four Seasons total landscaping debacle as well. GSA has been part of transition planning since the Presidential Transition Act was signed in 1963. Since then, the agency has identified the winner within hours or a day of media projections and weeks before the results were made official by the Electoral College. If there's no discussion of how that happens in this, I'm going to be furious, except you're in good shape because you know how that happens. It's not that the agency sends out detectives. Is there a winner? We got to look for clues. It's that there's a concession. And, that sets this in motion. But they probably won't discuss that. Let's see. Chris Liu, L.U., who served as former President Barack Obama's transition director in 2008, recalled that after Obama was declared the winner over late Senator John McCain on November 4th, he went to sleep to get up early the next morning to open the transition office. He missed the call from GSA's acting administrator, Jim Williams, informing him that he had signed over transition resources to the Obama team, although I'm not certain why that's actually important. Jim made the call at 1 a.m., Liu said. There was simply no controversy involved. So, I don't know whether they made that out to be like he was such a lazy guy that he missed the call. Leave a message. Anyway, Robert C. McKichan, Jr., M-A-C, Mac, something, capital K-I-C-H-A-N. Kitchen, you think? Anyway, Robert McKitchen Jr., an attorney who served as GSA General Counsel for Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush, said that because Trump is contesting the election and the electors have not yet voted, it's too early for Murphy to make a call. Once the administrator issues the letter, the funds can be spent and can't be recouped. So it's fiscal responsibility, you see. I don't think at this point I would feel comfortable making that determination now, McKitchen said. It's premature. McKitchen said he was confident Murphy would handle a difficult situation fairly. I'm not so certain, but he is. That's good news. As an attorney and as a procurement official, I think she has the highest standard of integrity, he said. Murphy has not sought the limelight during her tenure and was described by former colleagues as a by-the-book person, which is what's happening now, ultimately. She is regarded as well qualified, an expert on contracting with experience both at the agency, where she had previously served as chief acquisition officer, and on Capitol Hill, where she had been a staffer for multiple committees. Heading a federal agency unknown to most Americans seems like an ideal assignment. But under Trump, two issues of personal importance to the president became almost constant sources of controversy for her. There was, as we mentioned before, the lease that Trump's company holds with the agency for its D.C. hotel, located in the federally owned post office pavilion, old post office pavilion, and the planned consolidation of the FBI headquarters. Both projects have pressed Murphy into duty defending the president, and her actions elicited criticisms from the agency's watchdog as well as from congressional Democrats. Trump's hotel lease was signed with the agency before Trump took office, and he resigned his position with the company when he entered office. But he retained ownership of his business, allowing him to profit from the property while in office. Democrats held repeated hearings to get a better explanation of how the agency decided to allow Trump to keep the lease, given that the Constitution bars presidents from accepting gifts or payments from foreign governments, which often patronize the hotel. Under Murphy, the GSA repeatedly declined to provide documents to House Democrats, including the monthly income statements it receives from Trump's company. Last year, the agency's inspector general determined GSA had improperly ignored those concerns in allowing Trump's company to keep the lease. GSA defended itself by saying that the investigation found no undue influence, pressure, or unwarranted involvement of any kind by anyone. How nice. Trump has personally intervened in the most prominent real estate project in the agency's entire portfolio, the plan to build a new FBI headquarters that would allow the Bureau out of its crumbling and insecure J. Edgar Hoover building. During the first year in office, Trump and the GSA abruptly canceled the bipartisan plan to build a new suburban headquarters for the agency, infuriating Democrats who had worked more than a decade on the project and who alleged that Trump canceled the project so a competing hotel could never be built in place of the Hoover building, a site down the street from his hotel. The White House said the president's business had nothing to do with the decision. Okay. Well, that actually wraps up that article and all of the offshoots from it, mental and otherwise. Lots to get to in the balance of the week. Of course, also under discussion, and perhaps we'll pick this up tomorrow if we can get Joan to come by. And even if we can't, and I don't know why she wouldn't, but maybe she's exhausted from the whole ordeal of discussing what's up in the Supreme Court. Coming up soon, Amy Coney Barrett sits with the rest of them to decide the fate of the Affordable Care Act. How likely is it that they will do something completely crazy, and what exactly is at stake? And, well, let's just wrap it up here now. And, time, as always, to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and maybe we can get to some of the items he has on tap for you that we might have missed, or further examinations of those we beat to death. Let's see, there's Trump's devastating loss at the hands of massive voter turnout means Trumpism will become even more toxic.
From netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Yes, the sad story of the coronavirus. Rural doctors fear more deaths as the Dakotas experience virus sorrow. Trump's new Supreme Court won't make abortion go away. They'll just make it much more dangerous. And states that expanded voting access for the pandemic look to keep those changes for the future. That and much more, also from around the world. Next.